Welcome on the channel Nice Stories. Today we have intriguing story about
I was 18 years old when I started dating Jacob, a charming and witty guy who sat next to me in our introductory psychology class. His tousled brown hair and easygoing smile made it impossible not to be drawn to him. After weeks of exchanging glances and shared laughter over bad lecture jokes, he finally asked me out for coffee. One date led to another, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. Jacob came from a quintessential Southern family living in a quiet suburban town. His father, Mr. Thompson, was in his early 60s, a seasoned mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart of gold. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her mid-50s, was the epitome of a nurturing stay-at-home mom. Together, they created a warm and welcoming home filled with the aroma of freshly baked pies and the sound of laughter. After dating for a month, Jacob invited me to his family's Sunday dinner. "They're eager to meet you," he said with a grin. "I've told them all about you." I was both excited and nervous. Meeting the family was a significant step, but Jacob's enthusiasm was contagious. I spent hours picking out the right dress, a modest blue sundress that Jacob once complimented, and rehearsing polite conversation topics. When we arrived at his family's charming two-story house with its white picket fence and a porch swing swaying gently in the breeze, I took a deep breath. Mrs. Thompson greeted us at the door, her eyes crinkling warmly as she pulled me into a hug. "You must be Emily. We've been dying to meet you," she exclaimed. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, returning her embrace. "Please call me Margaret," she insisted. Inside, the house was cozy and inviting. Family photos lined the walls, pictures of Jacob and his siblings at various life stages, smiling brightly. I met Jacob's older brother, Daniel, a tall man with a firm handshake and an easy smile. His older sister, Sarah, was cradling her newborn daughter, Lily, who had the same sparkling blue eyes as her mother. Dinner was a feast. The table was laden with Southern classics: fried chicken, buttery biscuits, collard greens, and mashed potatoes. As we settled into our seats, the conversation flowed effortlessly. "So, Emily," Mr. Thompson began, his deep voice resonating across the table, "Jacob tells us you're studying biology?" I nodded, swallowing a bite of biscuit. "Yes, I am. I'm particularly interested in genetics and how it applies to medical research." "That sounds fascinating," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes lighting up. "Our Jacob always did have a knack for science, too." Jacob laughed. "I think Emily's the real scientist here." "I actually volunteer at our college's blood drive," I added. "It's been a great way to apply what I've learned and help the community." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair. "You know, I recently found out I'm O negative, a universal donor, they call it. Doctor mentioned it's pretty rare." "Really?" I said, intrigued. "That's amazing. O-negative donors are always in high demand." Jacob grinned. "I guess I got lucky. I'm O-negative too." Sarah looked up from her plate. "Well, Daniel and I are both AB. Must be all those unique genes in the family," she joked. I smiled thoughtfully. AB is indeed the rarest blood type. "If you don't mind me nerding out for a moment," I said with a playful wink. "Usually, AB blood type comes from one parent being type A and the other being type B." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Our dad is O negative, though." "Right," I replied slowly, a slight frown creasing my forehead. "So is your mom type A or B?" Mrs. Thompson's hand froze halfway to her glass of iced tea. A shadow flickered across her face. "Well, I'm type O as well," she said quietly. An uneasy silence settled over the table. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Oh," I murmured. "That's interesting." Jacob glanced at me, sensing my discomfort. "What does that mean?" he asked. I hesitated, not wanting to overstep. "It's just that, genetically speaking, two O-type parents typically can't produce a child with AB blood type." Daniel chuckled nervously. "Are you saying we were adopted or something?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes darted toward her husband, whose expression had hardened. Margaret, Mr. Thompson said slowly, is there something you want to tell us? Her face had turned ashen. No, of course not, she stammered. There must be some mistake. Sarah's gaze shifted between her parents. Mom? I swallowed hard. I'm sorry, I interjected. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It's probably just a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Jacob pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he searched for information. She's right, he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. 2O parents can't have an AB child. Mr. Thompson pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Margaret, explain. Now. Tears welled up in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Daniel stood up, his face flushed with confusion and anger. Mom, what is going on? Sarah clutched her baby closer, her eyes filling with tears. Mom, please. Mrs. Thompson broke down, sobbing into her hands. I'm so sorry, she cried. It was so long ago. Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened. How could you? Jacob looked devastated. So Dad might not be their biological father? She nodded miserably. I never wanted you to find out. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. A mistake? We're the result of a mistake? Sarah's voice quavered. Who is our real father? Mrs. Thompson shook her head. I don't know, she whispered. Mr. Thompson's face was a mask of pain and betrayal. All these years, Margaret. How could you lie to me? To us? The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped as accusations and questions flew. Daniel stormed out of the room, slamming the front door behind him. Sarah burst into tears, her baby wailing in her arms. Mr. Thompson stared vacantly at the wall, his world crumbling around him. I should go, I murmured, standing up shakily. Jacob reached out to me, his eyes pleading. Please stay, he said softly. I hesitated but nodded, feeling torn between wanting to support him and feeling like an intruder in this deeply personal family crisis. Mrs. Thompson looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I'm so sorry, dear, she whispered. This isn't your fault. I gave her a sympathetic look. I wish I hadn't said anything. She shook her head. No, it's better that the truth came out. Mr. Thompson stood up, his shoulders sagging. I need some air, he said hoarsely, walking out of the room. Jacob and I sat back down at the table. The remnants of the meal lay untouched, the once warm and inviting atmosphere now heavy with tension. I'm sorry, I said gently, placing my hand over Jacob's. Are you okay? He shook his head slowly. I don't know what to think. Everything feels like a lie. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Do you want to get out of here? I asked softly. He nodded. Yeah, let's go. We left the house quietly, walking down the street without a destination in mind. The evening air was cool and the sky was painted with the colors of dusk. I can't believe this is happening, Jacob murmured. My family, my parents. I squeezed his hand. I'm here for you. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Paternity tests confirmed that Mr. Thompson was not the biological father of Daniel and Sarah. The revelation tore the family apart. Mr. Thompson filed for divorce, unable to reconcile the years of deceit. Daniel and Sarah were consumed with anger and confusion, grappling with their identities and seeking answers about their biological father. Jacob withdrew into himself, the weight of the family secret bearing down on him. Our relationship became strained as he struggled with trust and betrayal. Despite my efforts to support him, the burden was too great. I think we need some time apart, he told me one afternoon, his eyes filled with sorrow. I need to figure things out. I nodded, my heart heavy. I understand. We parted ways, and I watched as he walked away, feeling a profound sense of loss. Months passed. I heard through mutual friends that the Thompsons had sold their house and moved away. Daniel and Sarah were seeking therapy, trying to piece together their fractured lives. Mr. Thompson had retired and moved to a small town upstate. As for me, I carried the weight of that fateful dinner with me. It was a harsh lesson in how fragile trust can be and the unintended consequences of a simple conversation. TLDR. During a dinner with my boyfriend's family, a casual discussion about blood types led me to inadvertently reveal that his older siblings couldn't biologically be the children of their own negative father, exposing his mother's infidelity and causing the family to unravel. Edit. For those asking how everyone knew their blood types, Jacob donated blood at our college drive. Sarah likely found out during her pregnancy, as it's standard procedure. Mr. Thompson was informed by his doctor, perhaps due to a medical checkup. I'm not sure how Daniel knew his blood type. Public service announcement. Knowing your blood type is important. It can be crucial in emergencies. If you're unsure, consider getting tested. Just be prepared for any unexpected revelations.